news programs from around the globe each week.
A once secret Pentagon study of UFOs may be finished, but according to published reports, the U.S. government is still collecting information about encounters between unknown aircraft and our military.
Now, so far, the government has not released official reports or any kind of findings from that study that was headquartered right here in southern Nevada. But the man who authorized that study knows a thing or two about some of the content.
The I-Team's George Knapp is here with more from an exclusive interview with former Senator Harry Reid. Hi, George.
A lot of stuff on the airwaves these days.
Yeah.
I heard one critic of the UFO study said on cable news last night that, of course, we should study unknowns, but that are encountered by our military pilots, but we shouldn't study those UFOs. The study conducted here in southern Nevada had input from our best and brightest, trained pilots and other observers, backed up by radar returns, instrumentation, and sometimes physical evidence. One account came from a bomber pilot who later became a U.S. senator.
I was flying, and there was an object next to me. I could not get rid of that. I couldn't. I slowed up, it would be there. I speed up, it would be there. I would dive, it would be there. He said, I called, nothing on radar.
The story told to Harry Reid came from Republican Senator Ted Stevens, whose experience as a World War II bomber pilot was shared during a closed-door meeting at the U.S. Capitol. Reid says that meeting in 2007 led to the funding for a clandestine study of UFOs. Reid had been approached by an unnamed intelligence official who felt the topic deserved study because of decades of spooky encounters between the U.S. military and unknown aerial objects, like this one off the California coast in 2004. UFOs as big as airliners played cat and mouse with the USS Nimitz carrier group several times over a 3-week period. This object, shaped like a giant tic-tac, performed seemingly impossible maneuvers.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
Another video recorded by military pilots caught glimpses of what aviators said was a fleet of unknown aircraft.
But are outmatched by a technology they've never seen. Clearly, this is not an experimental U.S. aircraft. But whose is it? How did it accomplish these feats?
News of the encounter was first unveiled back in October during the launch of a public benefit corporation called To the Stars Academy. The bigger story was missed, namely that the video had been analyzed in the study initiated by Senator Reid. Results from the study have not been made public. Reid says the program cast a wide net and included incidents with clear national security implications, such as chilling reports in which UFOs hovered over American nuclear missile bases, as portrayed in this documentary, UFOs and Nukes.
But it's all in documents. But scores and scores of mostly men up there would come out and look up there. Oh, I wonder what that is. And they wouldn't leave. The communications in the missile defense installation was shut down. Didn't happen once, more than once.
Reid says the study also investigated reports of USOs, unidentified craft detected underwater, and it incorporated the UFO files of several other nations which have been more open about the issue. One aim of the study was to find out the origin of the craft. Intelligence officials ruled out the Russians or Chinese, but Reid says our adversaries are likely ahead of us in trying to duplicate this far superior technology.
It's rotated.
Did you get any indication from people like the man you're talking about or others in the intelligence community or defense that Russia and China are looking at this stuff, are studying it?
The answer is yes.
Las Vegas businessman Robert Bigelow, whose aerospace facility housed the UFO study team, says he signed a strict non-disclosure agreement and cannot discuss the findings. Reid said the study produced voluminous reports, but was canceled because of fears within the intelligence community. Fear not only that the story would leak out, but fear based on religious beliefs of those who felt UFOs might be satanic. Did you ever hear that? Opposition that maybe this is something evil.
Yes. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people who didn't like it for a number of reasons. And religious, not affiliation, religious views of people didn't fit what they wanted to spend money on.
You know what I found scary? The part about the people at the Pentagon who say it's demons. Tell them that story. Tell them about the demons.
Yeah.
It's Halloween. Yes. Tell them about the demons. What is that, Dan? Go into that.
So in the film, one of the senior intelligence officials named Jay Stratton, he was the director of Air and Space Warfare at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then he ran the U.S. government's UAP task force. He tells a story about how he was trying to run this issue up the flagpole and bring attention to it.
At the Pentagon.
At the Pentagon, in a serious office space. And his superiors told him that they thought these things were demons and that he was doing the devil's work by looking into it. And on camera in the film, he says, I can't believe these words were coming out of their mouths. He's like, I'm briefing them on an advanced aerospace vehicle that's absolutely there. It's been spotted by trained observers like our Navy fighter pilots in their $80 million airplanes that we trust them with, right? It's been spotted on data collection systems like satellite and radar. And this guy's telling me it's a demon. It's insane. And he's like, my mind was blown, and this is something I'm dealing with inside of the government.
It's Halloween. Let me just ask the final question for the panel. Do you think demons and the devil are real?
Absolutely. I'm a Bible-believing Christian. I definitely, and I believe those could be fallen angels.
All these things could be real.
Fallen angels?
Yeah, fallen
The aliens are fallen angels.
That's possible. I think that's what they could be. That's what makes sense in my worldview.
Michael?
No.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the 21 CD podcast. As always, I am your ghost, John. We've got a really fun show for you today. For one of the first times, I guess, I'm talking about aliens and UFOs. I've been getting some inquiries recently about what I think about UFOs and aliens and stuff like that. And so I've been taking a look. And traditionally, I'm not going to lie, I'm not a huge alien guy. I'm not a big UFO fanatic. I don't know why necessarily, but there's something about them that keeps me from getting 100% on board the ship, I guess you could say. The full concept has not completely abducted me like it has many other people. And one of the main reasons is how often the government talks about UFOs and aliens. And if the government tends to talk a lot about something like this type of phenomenon, I'm way less likely to buy into it because I don't trust the government. I believe almost nothing the government says, especially pertaining to cryptids and supernatural and paranormal things, until they stop doing their blood rituals and whatnot, their pedophilic parties and all of their weird, well, you know what I'm talking about. And still, until they stop engaging in all this blatantly spiritual evil, I'm not really going to buy into what they want me to believe on a spiritual or even a technological, paranormal type level. That's not really something that they're going to be able to impact me on in any way whatsoever. But because of all the people who have been asking me to take a look at their stuff recently, all the people who have been inviting me to think critically on this matter, I have decided to do so. And I think I've got kind of a rough idea on how I've always felt about aliens and UFOs. And due to me, kind of forcing myself to sit down and talk about it, I've discovered a way to put it to words, okay? And it involves a lot of other people's research as well, of course. As always, I am just one guy. So when it comes to these types of things, when people do research that I agree with, that makes it easier for me to explain why I believe what I believe. And unfortunately, the Bible doesn't mention aliens. It doesn't really even mention UFOs, but it does mention certain things that could be perceived as aliens and UFOs. And so when open-minded or extremely experimental, even in a deviant fashion, scientists or explorers come up with ways to explain what the Bible seems to be talking about IRL, well, then I'm going to pull from that research. And, I think it's important to look at this type of thing critically and not just accept the fact that there is some superior race that is out there, some superior species, I should say, some type of entity that's out there watching us like we're in some giant fishbowl, like they're monitoring our progress and abducting us to finger our buttholes and all this kind of stuff. I think we should really look at this stuff through a more cynical lens. What if you discovered through some undeniable form of delivery that aliens absolutely were not real, and neither were UFOs, and what you were seeing was actually the most spectacular example of a Halloween costume ever witnessed? A demon, or perhaps an angel, a being from the spiritual realm who is in the disguise of high technology. In a way, discovering UFOs are the entities themselves, and that there's nothing necessarily inside them at all because they are the spirit. Well, that gives humanity precious little to aspire to, doesn't it? At least in the secular fashion. After all, aliens and UFOs account for a great deal of our sci-fi fantasies for the future and how we view high technology and whatnot. So if those things were never real in the first place because they were demons or spirits in disguise, then suddenly every story involving a UFO becomes drastically different. It doesn't really become, it's not really sci-fi anymore when it's in a movie, is it? It's a spiritual movie. It's not science fiction anymore. It's not high technology. It's a cryptid in a way. It's a spiritual cryptid. Because you're seeing a creature, not a craft. So when you view these UFOs and you ponder things like the sky whale phenomenon and stuff like that, to me, stuff begins to make a little bit more sense. As much as we would like to believe that that is a piece of technology because of the way that it is moving or the alleged stories of the government recovering craft and all this kind of stuff, I think that humanity has been convinced that these are actual elements of high technology. When in actuality, I think that the UFO is the creature. I think the UFO is the demon. And I think the demon is demonic. And I think that both are spiritual, obviously, because they're one and the same. That being said, I'm not going to go over this much in this episode, but that being said, I do believe that there are elements of high technology as well. So when the government recovers craft, they may very well be recovering enemy nations' high technology. They may be covering up their own technological failures, their own crafts that they have built to try to be more powerful in a war-fighting capacity and stuff like that. Humans have obviously, the governments of the world and all the scientists and everything, they've obviously invented stuff that you and I have no concept of. And so I think many of the recovered craft are probably elements of those programs. But the ones that we can't explain, I think a lot of that is probably because they aren't craft at all. And this is just a concept, it's just an idea. But through this lens, the abductions, they don't seem to be the abductions as we've been led to believe. They appear more as possessions with some kind of grand hallucinatory aspect or something like that. And within certain streams of Eastern Orthodox commentary, and I'm not Eastern Orthodox, but it is interesting to pull from what they believe, alien phenomenon is interpreted as less of an extraterrestrial visitation and more of a contemporary costume worn by older spiritual realities. So in this framework, the core claim is not merely that anomalous aerial events occur, but that the meaning of these events is best understood through categories like deception, temptation, and the manipulation of human perception. Father Seraphim Rose's Orthodoxy in the Religion of the Future is frequently cited as a formative text that articulates this view and treats UFO narratives as expressions of a broader religion of the future that displaces Christian cosmology with a secularized quasi-mystical mythology. Remember how we're always talking how scientists they can almost be thought of as wizards. They can almost be thought of as magicians, these scientists, because that's kind of what they are. They are there to essentially disprove God, and they do so just like the priests of Egypt did for when Moses arrived, to try to replicate everything that Moses did. Now, the Orthodox-oriented argument begins with a historical observation, and that's that cultures repeatedly report encounters with non-human intelligences. But the imagery kind of changes across time, and that's another thing we cover frequently on this show, is how demons develop different disguises to sort of fit the time that they're in, right? So where early centuries described angels, demons, fairies, nocturnal visitations, etc., modern witnesses describe spacecraft, the Greys, clinical examinations, abductions, technologically flavored messages, stuff like that. And this ideology interprets it not as proof of evolving extraterrestrial behavior, but actually as proof of adaptive presentation. Now, Father Seraphim Rose explicitly frames UFOs inside a wider critique of modern spiritual trends, New Age practices, occultism, and a rising new religious consciousness. I talked about this on the Midwest Mythos podcast the other day, which will be coming out in the next week or two. Rose argues that the modern world is primed to accept a false salvation narrative, often described as religion of the future, instead of what mankind has kind of always interpreted these things to be at, which is spirits and demons. So within that logic, aliens become sort of a secular angelology, if you will, an alternative set of higher beings who can explain the world, correct humanity, or shepherd in some kind of new moral order, okay? And a common internal test in this interpretive tradition is the claim that invocation of Christ or the cross. We hear a lot of people who go through abductions say that when they called on Jesus, the whole thing was, the whole encounter was sort of interrupted. And this kind of appears to produce a fear, a withdrawal, or a disappearance of the aircraft or the aliens. And this is part of a larger Orthodox spiritual anthropology. The spiritual world is real, and prayer is not merely psychological, self-soothing, but a practical act that can repel hostile entities such as demons and UFOs. How coincidental, wouldn't you say? A modern upgrade to this ideology borrows credibility from claims attributed to pilots and defense workers or intelligence-adjacent figures who suggest a non-material or sort of interdimensional component to UFOs. And here, the narrative often merges with the Collins elite story in UFO culture. Doing this kind of research was the first time I heard about the Collins elite, but I'm sure a lot of you guys, especially those of you who have researched this, know the story of the Collins elite, but they're an alleged group that interpreted or interprets UFOs as demonic deception. And the science side of this argument really doesn't like the Collins elite. A key feature of this ideology is its suspicion toward mainstream framing. Science fiction, entertainment, and official disclosure are kind of seen less as passive reflections of sightings and more as conditional mechanism. So this guy Rose, Father Seraphim Rose, his argument and the argument of later interpreters suggests that modern media makes the alien interpretation plausible and emotionally legible. so that the public will accept an explanatory regime that is non-Christian in its structure, even if it borrows religious feelings such as awe or revelation or salvation that might come from aliens. All of this is in secular form instead of spiritual religious form, okay? And this is where the ideology becomes pretty much diabolical, because it portrays the phenomenon as pedagogical deception, which is a long-form campaign to reshape what humans believe is real and what counts as authority and what higher beings are owed obedience, who these beings are and why we should consider them higher at all. Many abduction-style reports share features with sleep paralysis, dissociative REM states, lucid dreaming, and other altered state phenomena. Like I said before, these are also common traits of demonic possessions, okay? Maybe a lot of these encounters are actual demonic interference in your life. So when you whistle or you hoot and holler, and it appears that the UFO in the sky is reacting to the sounds that you're making, that actually might be a demonic force that is. And when I say force, that obviously sounds like strong, strength-based demonic energy, but it could literally just be a little demonic spirit who is messing with you and, yes, responding to you. So instead of a UFO, instead of an alien, you're seeing probably demonic energy. And a lot of people believe that even just interacting, whistling at a UFO or anything like that and seeing it sparkle in response to you, all that kind of stuff, a lot of people believe that you shouldn't really do that. And personally, I don't really know, because I'm just speaking hypothetically here about all of this stuff. But as somebody who doesn't necessarily believe that aliens are coming from outer space to listen to us whistle at them, I do kind of tend to lean more towards this explanation. The orthodox response is typically that even if the doorway is psychological, that does not preclude spiritual exploitation. In other words, a mind is still a battleground that can be influenced by demonic entities. But that is a metaphysical claim, not one that can be proved empirically, which is why science needs to step in and for some reason provide you with the ulterior explanation that there are little green men that are listening to you whistle and it makes them happy. In Derek P. Gilbert and Josh Peck's book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, they argue that what people call aliens today kind of lines up with the old gods of antiquity and the biblical framework of rebellious supernatural intelligences. And they use the language of fallen Elohim and the divine rebel narrative in this explanation. So, in other words, the phenomenon didn't start in the 1940s. We didn't start seeing all these UFOs. We didn't start seeing the aliens or thinking about them in the 40s. Those entities just learned how to disguise themselves differently, or chose to disguise themselves differently. Mankind was going through a technological era, a highly an era that was developing at a very fast pace and was really focused on the space race, was really focused on missiles and rockets and expanding their technological horizons. So this is also how these entities, these spiritual entities, chose to mask themselves. The book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, is basically saying you should watch the framing. If humanity can be guided to interpret manifestations as advanced off-world visitors instead of spiritual entities, then the entire moral map changes. Miracles become technology. Angels and demons, they become misunderstood non-human neighbors from outer space. They become little green men. They become the Greys. Ancient worship becomes nothing but cult confusion. And once that swap happens, this is where we get into the sociological realm, The authors suggest that society becomes easier to steer because the new story comes with new authorities, new saviors, and new rules of reality. Who knows? In the end times, as described in Revelation, it might literally look like an alien invasion. If you read the book, that's kind of what it sounds like, right? So they treat disclosure less like an honest confession and more like a slow acclimation program. They drip feed the public, they normalize the alien imagery, they recruit credibility brokers, they start this whole propaganda system around this idea, and when the big moment hits, people accept the interpretation that they've been trained to accept. This is exactly like soft disclosure, except the disclosure is something that doesn't even exist. Now, who benefits from the narrative that these people, all of us, are being handed about aliens and UFOs and all this? Even if you don't buy every conclusion, this book, which you can go get this book on Amazon if you want. Again, it's called The Day the Earth Stands Still. It wants you to notice the government language. It wants you to notice the entertainment priming, what kind of entertainment you're witnessing. Remember when I was talking about the sci-fi element, how aliens become sci-fi instead of spiritual? They become more of like like a science fiction instead. I don't know what genre you would call spiritual. It's almost like you would just call spiritual real life. So it wants you to notice how the story, the concept of aliens and UFOs kind of takes you away from real life and brings you into this science fiction realm. And the language of how we're entering a new epoch, all that kind of stuff. And then cross-check it against older religions and texts and ancient cosmologies and paintings, okay? And you'll notice something. We will begin to say, oh, they've been seeing aliens and UFOs forever. But they never called them that. The question isn't really, are we alone out here? The question is, what is it want, and why did it wait for the modern world to call it extraterrestrials, aliens, UFOs, instead of what earlier civilizations called it? Why have they chosen to wear this costume of high technology instead of continuing to appear as what they've always appeared as throughout time? Or perhaps it is a matter of interpretation, and it's the governments themselves that have steered us away from how these things should be perceived. Leading UFO researcher Ron James says senior figures in the U.S. government fear aliens are in fact demons, as we saw in the beginning clips of this episode. And Ron, who is Director of Media Relations for UFO research group MUFON, or as I like to call them, Muffin, claims that there is a large contingent of people within the Pentagon who oppose the work of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, also known as, and you've probably heard it called, ATIP, because they think the UAPs, regularly reported by U.S. military sources, are piloted from creatures by hell. He says he was told by Luis Elizondo, who I'm sure you guys know about. He was one of those guys who was out here testifying that aliens are real. He went on record, he's the boss of ATIP, and he said it was not just a little voice in the Pentagon, but a huge group of people thought the phenomenon that was being witnessed was demons. Now, this fundamentalist Christian lobby within the U.S. defense establishment actually affected Elizondo's ability to get funding because they're less likely to fund something that is spiritual and more likely to fund something that appears technological or science-based. So, which is kind of funny. Oh, you're sensing something spiritual? It's fake. It's fake. Aliens, however, real. Oh, okay. This seems kind of like a matter of opinion, doesn't it? It seems like they always like to say that things of a spiritual nature are matters of opinion, matters of elements of humanity that can't be proven, therefore they're not real. But at the same time, they can't prove aliens are real, allegedly, and yet they're more willing to fund that fanciful production instead of something that may actually be real, such as spirituality, considering almost everybody has an element of it within them. Those that don't are typically your NPCs who may not even be entirely human at all. But I digress. This guy, Ron, the director of Muffin, he spoke to staunchly Christian U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett. He said, I sat down and interviewed him, and his feeling was that if you look in the Bible and you look at Ezekiel building the wheel, there's a lot of people that think that that was a spaceship. He adds that His Holiness, the Pope, has officially acknowledged that there is life on other planets. Somehow the Pope knows. I talked to John Brandenburg, he says, a researcher who's done a lot of work about Mars. And he told me that he was working under classification as a physicist for a long time. And he said there's a big contingent that extreme fundamental religion is governing what we are investing our energy and our time in. But while some authorities maintain that UFOs can't be from another planet, Ron from Muffin or MUFON thinks that they could be from another universe altogether. They're not necessarily from another planet, they are from another dimension. This guy, Burt Goldman, came up with this concept of quantum jumping, and his theory is that there is another version of you, essentially existing in multiple realities, but these realities all exist. And they were talking about all of this right around the time that all this multiverse stuff was becoming really popular. A little bit more soft disclosure, perhaps. Who knows? Burt Goldman said that you can quantum jump through certain meditation techniques, okay? And certain mental exercises and certain visualization exercises and actually connect with these other versions of yourself. You can even bring something back from them. Whether any of these versions of ourselves live in realities where demons are sort of coasting through our skies in flying saucers wasn't necessarily mentioned. Now, this guy, Nick Redfern, he wrote a book called Final Events, Demonic UFOs, Alien Abductions, the Government, and the Afterlife. It's not really a conventional UFO book, but Redfern collects claims and testimonies and fragments of insider lore and kind of arranges them around a single unsettling proposition. And that is, what if a portion of the national security world concluded that the UFO phenomenon is not extraterrestrial at all, excuse me. This is like a tongue twister, but spiritual, specifically deceptive, predatory, and compatible with what older religious frameworks would call demonic. And this is a very interesting concept to me. This kind of changes the whole game when you think about UFOs and aliens as demons, and not only thinking about it from that perspective, because I know a lot of you guys do, but thinking about it from the perspective that there's a good portion of the government who also believes that. Because the government is seemingly simultaneously telling you that it's not demonic, it's not spiritual, and those things don't exist, while at the same time secretly maintaining that is a possibility. Which is bizarre, because it makes you ask a different type of question. Why don't they want us to know that these are elements of spirituality instead of elements of high tech and exotic biology? Because it reframes disclosure as something other than truth-telling, okay? It recasts curiosity as something that is risky. And it kind of suggests that the state may sometimes react not to what it knows, but to what it fears. So when they pop out, like Donald Trump just did the other day, and he's like, get ready for more alien and UFO disclosure. Immediately my butthole is preparing to be fingered, but not, I might add, by little green men, but rather, I feel like I'm about to be told another big lie. I feel like we're about to get some really weird science fiction talk that is absolutely unverifiable because it's absolutely untrue. At the center of Redfern's book is an alleged informal faction inside or near the U.S. defense and intelligence ecosystem, commonly referred to in UFO circles as Collins Elite. Again, I'm hearing about this Collins Elite. And in Redfern's telling, the group came to believe that UFO encounters, abduction reports, and related paranormal phenomena resemble spiritual deception more than interplanetary visitation. Okay? The key feature is not advanced tech, but instead, it's manipulation. It's the shaping of perception. It's the molding of behavior, okay? And it is the developing of belief, is what it is. And this is kind of a sharp departure from the popular nuts and bolts model where craft are these physical machines piloted by biological beings from another star system. Redfern's narrative proposes that the phenomenon can look physical when it wants to. The UFOs and the whatnot, they can look physical when they want to. But the deeper nature is psychological and metaphysical. It adapts its imagery to the expectations of the era. Not too long ago, there were a bunch of videos coming out of people actually shooting at these UFOs, even missiles being able to lock on to these UFOs. And yet somehow the craft, if you want to call them that, were impervious to this weaponry. Well, maybe that's because they're not actual craft, okay? Maybe that's because they're spiritual entities. When medieval witnesses saw angels and fairies and demons, that's what they kind of thought of them as, spiritual entities. When modern witnesses see aliens or space brothers or UFOs, they might be seeing the same exact thing. And yes, this doesn't take away from the cryptids that we see in the woods either. I think there are many different types of cryptids, right? This doesn't take away from your dogman or your fairy sightings out in the forest. These spiritual entities are all around us all of the time. If you think of them as since they want us to think of aliens as biological entities, think of the spiritual realm as an animal kingdom, okay? There is a diverse array, of these entities all around us at any given time. The Bible mentions a few different types of them. You know, we have the seraphim, we have the cherubim, we have these entities that there are multiple different types of creatures out here of a spiritual nature that we can't necessarily bear witness to in the same way as we would the animal kingdom. And yet, they are there. The wardrobe changes throughout time, but the pressure on the human mind, of course, remains the same. That's why we continue to talk about these things. We just change their names over time. Anyway, I don't know much about the Collins Elite. I didn't want to get too involved in that. I didn't want to make a whole episode about this group. More or less, I wanted to draw from the research of people who believe what I believe. So I didn't really go down the rabbit hole of the Collins Elite themselves. And so whether they actually exist exactly as described is less important to me than the function of the story itself. Redfern is documenting a claim about belief inside institutions. That distinction, which is belief versus proof, becomes his book's most crucial fault line, in my opinion. And one of the book's most provocative contributions is how it changes the meaning of disclosure, like we said before. In mainstream conversation, disclosure is kind of imagined as a confession, as something that the government was forced to give you. The government admits what it knows, and the public finally receives a clear answer. And as conspiracy theorists always do, because it is one of their greatest faults, is they hear the disclosure and they're like, told you, and then everything ends there. So good job, you're right. Something diabolical was explained to you, such as the entire government is a cult of pedophiles, and everybody just goes, haha, knew it, yes, we were right, and then does absolutely nothing about it, because why would you, I guess, right? Like, What are you going to do? Ooh, the entire government is nothing but a conglomerate of pedophiles and cannibals and all this. Let's not overthrow the government or any. I got to go to work tomorrow. I can't focus on this right now. I got things to do. I got places to be. Am I right? Am I right, my fellow conspiracy theorists? Yeah, we were right, but it's not important enough to do anything about it. So, yeah, business as usual tomorrow. Let's keep paying taxes. Business as usual tomorrow. Let's just turn on Netflix and watch the next season of Love is Blind, everybody, because yeah, so what? Yeah, of course we were right. We've been saying this for years. And then that's where the story dies, right? And then it's just everything goes on as normal, but I digress. Sorry, that was probably a rant for Darth John, but whatever. I get it today. If influential people truly believed the phenomenon was spiritually dangerous, then secrecy would not merely be about national security or technological advantage. It would be on a moral level. It would be moral quarantine. We would be forced to reflect on what's going on inside of our souls. We would be forced to get right with God, okay? The public would be kept away, not because the truth is necessarily mundane, but because the truth is considered contaminating. If everybody found out, without a shadow of a doubt, if the government actually let us believe these are demons, okay? God is real. Satan is real. Everything you've ever read about in the Bible. As a matter of fact, let's just take it a step further. Everything that you've ever read about in any of these spiritual texts, any of these religious books, they're all true. Yes, there are demonic and spiritual entities all around us at all times, and they're in the sky, and our weapons can't touch them, and when you say the name of the Lord, they disappear. So definitely do that before the aliens come for your sphincter, before they finger your sphincter, if you will. If the government actually said that kind of stuff, the entire world would change. There's something that keeps them from doing this. And I don't know if it's just ignorance, if they genuinely don't know, or if it's because they're all pedophilic elite, and so it doesn't really assist them to tell the public that. I don't know what it is, but I can guarantee you that if they developed their resources toward allowing people to understand that on a greater level than trying to explain this weird story that they made up about aliens, this would be a completely different world. And then, yeah, you might actually have a realm like Tartaria where humans do focus on technology that is different than us trying to mimic the abilities of aliens with Mars travel and all this kind of weird stuff that is just so obviously never going to happen. And even if it does, no, it won't. Like, it's not gonna... Our future is not in the stars, guys. Our future is here. And I think that that is one of the biggest appeals to the whole story of Tartaria, is this concept that when you focus on your soul, the meaning of life, and your own realm, instead of constantly trying to get away from it, humans are capable of so much more. They just are. If you can persuade the public that the phenomenon is demonic instead of some alien force, you can also control public behavior through fear, however. That means even a false demonic narrative could function as a tool. So it's not like we would just have to believe it's demons and all of a sudden everything would be better. It kind of forces this double skepticism of the UFO phenomenon and skepticism of how institutions might weaponize interpretations of it. Aliens and UFOs appear to me to be a mixture of propaganda and also technological advances that have to remain hidden from enemy nations, and also have to be hidden from the public for when the government eventually brings about this control element upon the people that is impossible to overthrow. A recurrent reason that people find Redfern's thesis compelling is that it seems to match the messiness of all these high strangeness cases. These reports where the phenomenon behaves less like an aircraft, more like some kind of trickster entity responding to whistles, dancing when you play music, all this kind of stuff. And when Redfern talks about deception, he talks about this sort of framing that offers a kind of explanatory umbrella, okay? The inconsistencies of these stories are not flaws in the data. They are features of the phenomenon itself. The encounter becomes less about the transportation and the technological interference with your body and all that kind of stuff, and more about persuasion. In a demonic possession light, these are elements of the possession that distract you, that allow you to be more susceptible while not allowing you to know what is actually going on. It's less where did it come from and more what is it actually doing to the witness. Understand? I hope I'm saying this in a way that is understandable. But this is also where the thesis becomes pretty vulnerable, if you ask me, because the same traits such as contradiction, the theatrics of these stories, the psychological intensity, they're also consistent with just elements of known human behavior, such as susceptibility to being persuaded that something happened that maybe didn't necessarily happen just because the people that you experienced it with said it happened. You're more suggestible, I guess I could say. Sleep disorders, cultural priming, stuff like this, memory distortion, trauma responses, hoaxes, the self-propagating logic of modern folklore. You're more inclined to believe something is happening to you in the way that you have been brought up to believe that if something like this did happen to you, that is how it would be, etc. And humans obviously expand on their encounter stories all the time. They try to fill in the gaps because a lot of times in these encounter stories, since they are encountering something since they are going through something that is unexplainable, because it's demonic or spiritual in nature, they have to somehow fill the gaps of the story with what they actually believe logically. And that's why I think that a lot of these cryptid encounters in the woods and stuff, you might actually all be experiencing a lot of the same things. Some people might call it Dogman, some people might call it Goatman, some people might call it Bigfoot, but perhaps, at least a part of the time, they're actually all the same being. But based on what we believe, the type of media we consume, the type of movies we watch, the type of YouTube videos we engage in, the type of reading we do, we tell part of the story ourselves. Okay? The fact that a government actor believes something does not make it true. And here's another thing. People think that the government is very, like government agencies and whatnot are very stainless steel a lot of the time. They think they are very by the book. They think that all of these programs, all of these branches of the law and the government and science and all this stuff, they're very flawless. They're very critical, all this stuff. But that's not necessarily true. A lot of institutions in these realms are superstitious. A lot of agencies can become ideological. Just look at this whole Charlie Kirk thing and how this has sort of like transformed the government into this weird religious identity, right? Like now you have politicians saying stuff like Israel should be able to take over the entire Middle East because God gave them the right to. It's like stuff like this, like Israel is allowed to commit genocide because they are those people that they're committing genocide on are enemies of them because God told them so. It's like stuff like this that shows you that these institutions, these agencies, these projects, they can be extremely spiritually manipulated, if you will. Individuals inside classified environments can construct these elaborate narratives and then mistake their access for authority. People will run on religious matters for office and stuff like that. Sometimes the most dangerous stories are the ones that are told by the people with this access, with these positions, these badges, and these budgets. And they can be very spiritually and religiously and ideologically motivated. This is something that we need to come to an understanding to understand that the enemy is spiritual. And that we wage war not necessarily against flesh and blood, but also against matters of the soul, matters of spirit. A purely extraterrestrial UFO story is, at its core, a story about geography. This is a very interesting conclusion to come to in your own mind. So I'll say it again. When we think about UFOs and we think about aliens, when we think about extraterrestrials, at its core, that concept is a story of geography. If these are biological entities from another realm, from other planets, other star systems, whatever, other biologies, it is a matter of geography. These are just creatures of the animal kingdom, of an animal kingdom, right? A demonic or interdimensional story is a story about destiny. It's a story about prophecy. It's a story about the soul. It's a story about what humans are, what consciousness is, what death means, and whether the universe has any moral architecture to it at all. And that raises the emotional stakes dramatically, at least for me. It transforms UFO discussion from a debate about craft into a debate about salvation, and into a debate about deception and control utilizing deception. And that is precisely why this framework, in my opinion, is so powerful on a cultural level. It ties the phenomenon to the oldest human anxieties: mortality, meaning, purpose, and the possibility of being tricked by something smarter than us, but not necessarily part of some exotic biology. What all of this kind of discussion does, when we look at it from this light, what this does is, it doesn't solve UFOs. This research that I'm referring to and that I'm pulling from for this episode, it doesn't solve UFOs. And I'm not trying to present this episode as some piece of media for you to use to solve UFOs or extraterrestrials. But what it does effectively is it exposes the instability of the categories that we use. That's how I wanted to structure this episode. Alien, angel, demon, hallucinations, psyops. It exposes these categories, the instability of these categories, and it forces us to ask which of those labels might be the actual real weapon. If the phenomenon is deceptive, then the danger is obvious. If the narrative about the phenomenon is deceptive, then the danger is even greater, because it can reorganize society without ever needing a single craft in the sky. And a lot of people like to say that religion is the deceptive phenomenon, that religion is the thing that is trying to pull us away from science, that Christianity. I've been getting a ton, it's really, really weird. I've been getting a ton of comments from people who just blatantly hate God and hate Christians. It's strange because, I don't know why. This didn't happen when I was a smaller podcaster, but once I hit 10,000 followers, all of a sudden the spiritual battle of going into the comments has become much, much more chaotic and demanding. This war in the comments of my videos is diabolical because there are so many people who are now coming to my videos. And if you're listening to me and you're one of these people, I want you to know you will never, ever, ever succeed here. You will never, ever get your point across here. You are wasting your time and your energy by even thinking that whatever retarded comment you're going to leave that tries to dismantle my faith in God is just such a pathetic waste of your time and your energy. And I just, I don't hate the people who are leaving these comments, but I can't even take them seriously because the hatred is often the hatred for the belief that this is all due to a spiritual reality, that this is all due to the existence of God and the spiritual realm, that angels and demons exist, and that there is a spiritual war going on. The fact that these people rage so aggressively against that concept is proof to me that the concept is valid and real and true. If you oppose something so dramatically that other people find a matter of faith, a matter of beautiful obsession with something wonderful such as salvation, if you oppose something like that so aggressively that you actually think you're going to walk into my lion's den and win some sort of argument in the YouTube comments, you got another thing coming. So just don't. And if you do, I'll just delete your comment because I don't have time for that kind of that blatant retardation. You can go ahead and if you want, just start fights. But the fact of the matter is, my friend, if you want to talk about it because you want to know more about God and you want to know more about spirituality and you want to know more about Jesus, let's talk. But the flamboyant hatred and snide comments, you're a bot. You're an NPC. You're not real. You're just a worthless username on a nearly worthless website. So grow up. Give it a chance. Why don't you? Research critically. Give it a chance. Give it a chance. Throughout history, science and magic, they've walked hand in hand. One of the more interesting and overt overlaps between the two occurred somewhere in the Mojave Desert in 1946. And it's strange to think of something magical occurring so close to the end of World War II, but there was a lot going on. And this was a global event that was in itself a prime example of a world obsessed, like we said before, with science and technology to the point of nuclear annihilation. Okay? One such acolyte of annihilation was Jack Parsons. Some of you may have heard of him. He was born Marvel Whiteside Parsons. That was his name. And Jack had juggled his dual interests of magic and science for years. And during the bulk of the 1940s, the interest in science had been his day job. He worked at Caltech. He co-founded both the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the JPL, and Aerojet. And he was an expert, even if at times he was a dangerous expert, in the field of rocketry. He was also keenly interested in magic and the weird. And in 1939, he actually converted to Thelema, which was this occult philosophy founded by Aleister Crowley. And in 1944, he was ousted from both JPL and Aerojet. And one of the reasons for Parsons' expulsion was there was something about his work safety ethics that they didn't vibe with. And apparently, I've heard people say that the problem was that he didn't have any work safety ethics. He was a loose cannon. He did crazy stuff in the name of science and magic. and this combination of the two. According to a historian of the time, Parsons wanted to work in the same way as he'd done in his backyard, instinctive and without regard for safety. But there was another reason for his expulsion. Parsons' interest in the occult was just plain disreputable. It was causing the companies that he worked for and the organizations he was a part of great shame because he was so deeply interested in the occult and motivated by magic. And it was during this hectic, war-torn time that Parsons met and quickly befriended a young Navy officer and science fiction writer, coincidentally, named L. Ron Hubbard. And Hubbard was also, of course, interested in the occult. And it was in 1946 that he and Parson actually hatched their scheme. A scheme that was so diabolical that it would probably end up leading to Parsons' death. The two sorcerers, as I think they can be called, decided that it was up to them to change the world. And if they couldn't do it with machines of war, then they would do it with, dun-dun-dun-dun, sex magic. Their project was called the Babylon Working. And the Babylon Working started in Parsons' home named the Parsonage sometime in January in 1946. They were trying to summon, they were trying to bring into existence or birth the Thelemite goddess Babylon onto Earth. The woman, dubbed the Scarlet Woman by Parsons, would then give birth to an entity called the Moon Child. And there was this hope that this would usher in a new magical age for humanity. And while Crowley had written about doing something like this, Parsons decided to turn the idea into praxis. And, you know, there were some stories, I couldn't verify them, but there were some stories that he even launched a fetus into space using one of his rockets. I don't know if that's real. I couldn't verify it undisputably, but I was one of the stories that I read. Now, while Parsons had been steeped in the occult for years, Hubbard, his science fiction writer buddy and Navy vet, was kind of a novice. His role, according to Parsons, was to be a scribe. Parsons, which of course is something he was suited for. Parsons felt that Hubbard was acutely attuned to magical phenomena and even wrote to his friend Crowley, who was still alive, to say so. And although Hubbard had no formal training in magic, he did have an extraordinary amount of experience and understanding in the field. And this is something that Parsons wrote to Crowley himself. He says, "I deduce he is in direct touch with some higher intelligence, possibly his guardian angel, and that he is the most thelemic person I have ever met and is in complete accord with our own principles." Hubbard would ultimately found, dun-dun-dun-dun, Scientology. But that was still years away. Scientology. So, you know, I'm having like a braingasm, if you will. I'm having a moment where my brain is just, because it's like all of this spiritual, religious stuff coming out of these minds. And even though I'm not a Scientologist, clearly Parsons and Hubbard were spiritual deviants and maniacs. But it's very interesting what happens when you start to look at this kind of stuff through a lens that isn't purely scientific, by the math, by the book. As you would, as Parsons would say, kind of like backyard phonetics or something like that. Backyard basketball sort of style. Like you're sort of in the backyard, you're in the shed and you're working on getting to the moon. You're working on summoning. It's like very Stranger Things in a weird way, right? It's like and then of course you find out that they go on to basically make Scientology come into play, which is one of the, if not the biggest cult in the world today. Very, very interesting. There's a lot of Scientologists don't even like see regular doctors. Okay, they're completely on a different level of humanity. Tom Cruise is a Scientologist, and he might be a vampire. Tom Cruise might be immortal. We don't know what's going on with this guy. But after holding numerous ceremonies in his Orange Grove home, it was time to finish the Babylon working project. Parsons was ready to finish this. He was ready to summon this new world. He was ready to meet his maker, if you will. And the last ceremony of this all occurred somewhere in the Mojave Desert in February or March of 1946. It was apparently cut short by something mysterious, and Parsons felt that Babylon working, the ritual, had been completed. Something happened. Not exactly sure what, but Parsons felt like his work was done. So when Parsons and Hubbard returned to his home, the parsonage, where Parsons and many of his occult friends all lived, it was sort of this. He had a bunch of weird roommates, and they all lived here. He saw his woman, his Scarlet Woman, or whatever he called her. What did he call her? His Thelemite goddess. His Scarlet Woman. He saw her, okay, after this ritual. His elemental manifestation, his Babylon, his Scarlet Woman, she had appeared. And of course, she didn't know she was Babylon incarnate. She only knew herself as Marjorie Cameron. She was just a girl, okay? As a writer, though, and an oracle of the weird, Ken Lane, this other guy, who was, I think, living with them at the time, had this to say about their meeting. Cameron, Marjorie Cameron, the Scarlet Woman, Babylon herself, enjoyed the bohemian scene at Parsons' Pasadena Lodge on Orange Grove Avenue, but was not originally aware that she had apparently been summoned by ritual magic. Only when she reported her sighting of a luminous disc, possibly the first sighting of the modern flying saucer era, put that in your pocket, did Parsons and Hubbard let her in on a secret. They had opened a hole in the sky, a hole in space and time, and something or many things had come through it. So that's what Parsons and Hubbard allegedly did in the Mojave Desert sometime in 1946. They basically, it sounds like they basically opened a portal, okay? The idea that extraterrestrials could be interdimensional beings is advanced by many UFO researchers. If you're hearing this all for the first time on the 21 CD podcast, just let it be known that this is research done by many different people that I've compiled. This hypothesis seems to kind of take a serious turn after all of the Skinwalker Ranch incidents, as well as astronomer and UFO researcher Jacques Vallée's suggestion that aliens are real but exist in another dimension that coexists with ours. I'm sure some of you immediately remembered Bigelow as a former owner of the Skinwalker Ranch. He was mentioned in one of the clips in the beginning of this video. And according to that hypothesis, UFOs are modern manifestations of a phenomenon that has occurred throughout recorded human history, which in prior ages was ascribed to mythological or supernatural creatures. Things just changed names. Things just developed a different disguise. Jacques Vallée states that UFOs and related events of a paranormal nature involve visitations from other realities, or as you and I might call them, other dimensions. This idea proposes that these alternative realities exist separately, yet parallel to our own. This is a piece of paper. I'm going to draw realities and how to think of two realities intersecting. Here is one reality, okay? This is one reality. Now you have two realities. If you experience aliens or some type of encounter with an interdimensional creature or a creature from another reality, both you and that interdimensional being are in the circled area. That's how you think of two realities intersecting and where those encounters might be occurring. Of course, this is just a concept. This is just an idea. But to me, it feels a little bit more realistic than all of these little green men and these beings from far, far away interested in the inner workings of my anus, okay? There must be an interdimensional membrane that protects one dimension from the other, and the interdimensional tunnels that exist in between, connecting those dimensions, must have some kind of unstable entrance, wandering unpredictably from one hypersurface to another. All this is just an idea. I know the haters are going to hate this episode. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. The life is in the blood.